Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. We've shrunk down a little bit in our ballroom today, but there's definitely still some seats up front, so you can come join us up here if you haven't found a seat yet. Welcome to our final day of the National Native Seed Conference. Hope you found this program inspiring and motivating. And I haven't been able to attend very many sessions, but I've really enjoyed watching everybody connect in the hall during breaks. And I hope that you're all learning a lot this week. I'm relatively new to the world of seeds. I've worked in plant conservation and salmon habitat restoration and with invasive species. And I didn't really think about how seed really kind of connects all that type of work. And I'm really excited that I'm part of this world now. And as many of us have been saying this week, it all starts with a seed. And that seed I'm learning is really powerful. I've heard about seed returning from the depths of decades of sediment after dam removal or after catastrophic fires, bringing those seeds back to the surface, and seed bringing new and diverse life to degraded ecosystems, and seed bringing us here together today. And it really feels like the start of something great. And I'm really thankful I got to spend this week with you all, and thankful for Seed for connecting us. So we have a shorter program today. Another quick look at our sponsors, but our program today is our opening plenary sessions, and then just concurrent sessions from 10 to noon, and then we'll depart and go out and work in our seed world. Our sessions today include a panel on the native seed supply chain, a symposium on seeds of success, native seed production, community restoration, and climate change and restoration. And Morgan made a few room changes. We'll have another session out in the foyer to make more space for everybody, so refresh your Whova app and you should see those room changes shortly. A few announcements. There are still a couple of posters that were left last night, and they're in the registration area. And then we do still have some lost and found items that are also in the registration area. And now I'd like to welcome Tom to come on up.
Thanks, Alexis, and thanks everybody this morning. It's good to see you all. Thursday of the conference. I hope you're all feeling that weird mixture of energized and exhausted that I feel about this time. It's really been fun, and we're not done yet. We're not done with the conference, and we're not done with all we're setting out to do to save the world, just that little thing we're up against. I wanted to take a moment to again thank the sponsors of this conference. The Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, the National Wildlife Federation, Hedgerow Farms, United Plant Savers, and the Natural Areas Association, without whose partnership we could not have put on this conference. So I think we need to give a big thank you to all of the sponsors. Thank you. We also need to thank the hard work of all of the exhibitors for their support of this conference and all they've done to bring all of what they do to the conference. So that's Abnova Ecological Solutions, ACOM, Allendon Seed, BFI Native Seeds, Great Basin Fire Science Exchange, Great Valley Seed, Miller Ag Renewal, Roundstone Native Seed, and Truax Equipment Company. Wow, what a great group. Thank you. And all of us are here involved in getting seeds on the ground to restore the land. But I want to specifically call out all of the seed producers who are here today and those who are not as well. You are the producers of the seeds we need. I know you all care deeply about the plants you produce and the habitats they restore. We and the Native Seed Network website are here to support you, promote your products, and make the seeds that you make go right on the ground where they're supposed to. And we look forward to working with you to update our information on the Native Seed Network website. Thank you. Thank you to all the seed producers. Now, one of our exhibitors is Jim Truax, and it was his birthday a couple of days ago. And Jim, I want to honor you. Is Jim here this morning? He left? Okay, well, Jim's a great guy, and he's been to, I think, all of these conferences, and I just really wanted to honor him. And then last but not least, I really want to extend a greater thank you to the Bureau of Land Management for being the primary sponsor of this conference. In particular, I want to thank Peggy Olwell because she has made this conference happen since the very beginning, and in 2010. And Peggy has been a huge supporter of native plant conservation for many years, and she continues to bring the energy, vision, and creativity to our field. And thank you very much, Peggy Olwell. All right, so enough thank yous, and thank you to all of you. We all deserve a big hand and a pat on the back to all of us, but you know, we can do that later. We do have a quick switch in our program this morning. We have two speakers for plenaries. It's Kaye Havens and Elizabeth Ledger, but we're going to change the order. So Kaye Havens is going to go first. So Kaye Havens holds a BS and an MA in botany from Southern Illinois University and a PhD in biology from Indiana University. And she spent 3 years as the conservation biologist at Missouri Botanic Garden before joining the Chicago Botanic Garden in April of 1997. She is currently the garden's Senior Director of Ecology and Conservation and Senior Scientist. Her research interests include the effects of climate change on plant species, restoration genetics, pollination networks, ex situ conservation, and invasion biology. She served on a National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine working group to assess the native seed supply in the U.S., as we all been talking about. And she chairs the Non-Federal Cooperators Committee of the Plant Conservation Alliance. She's active in plant conservation advocacy with elected officials and collaborates with a variety of academic institutions, agencies, and stewardship organizations to help improve conservation efforts for plants and plant communities. So help me welcome Kaye Havens. Thank you, Kaye.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know, I'm not Beth Ledger, sorry. You'll have to wait to hear her wonderful presentation. But I'm here today to share information about the report that many of you have been talking about this week that came out of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine on seeds. So, first, I want to thank everybody who participated in this report. Our committee is shown here. We were chaired by Susan Harrison at UC Davis. We were a mix of botanists, ecologists, ag economists, people who specialize in surveys and data analysis. We had a wonderful staff from the National Academies of Science, led by Robin Shane. And our statement of task, this is what BLM, the sponsor of the report, asked us to do, was to assess the uses and demand for native seed or native plant materials, and we'll just call those seeds from now on, to assess the supply chain for native plant materials, recommend ways to increase capacity, and although we had a Western focus because BLM was the sponsor, we did look at this issue nationally. We relied on the definitions provided by the Society of Ecological Restoration, and we focused our efforts on the parts of the restorative continuum there in that kind of green mustard color towards the end. So ecosystem restoration and recovering native ecosystems, things that fall under the ecological restoration bucket. But we certainly recognize that there were other uses of native seeds for other parts of this continuum. So if anything, we probably underestimated the need for native seed. And we stood on the shoulders of many of you in this room who have done work on this issue for a very long time. It was a quarter of a century ago, can you believe it, that Congress first asked agencies to develop a reliable supply of native seed for ecological restoration. That call went to the Plant Conservation Alliance. It led to some policy papers and ultimately this national seed strategy that I'm sure everybody knows. But here we are 25 years later, and we still don't have the right seed at the right time in the right place. And so this is one of the issues we were addressing. How can we increase capacity? I know many of you are familiar with this cycle. This is kind of a shorthand here for the native seed supply chain in the US, starting with wildland seed collection. Most of that work in our country is done by Seeds of Success, certainly not all of it, but a lot of it. And if I can put on my Botanic Garden hat for a second, I'm really proud that we have provided nearly 2,000 interns and contractors to do this work over the last 25 years and have and have made most of the SOS collections. After wildland seed collection, that G0 seed, part of it goes into long-term storage so that we have those genetic resources in the future. We don't know what gifts they will give us down the road, so it's good to have some in long-term storage. And then the seed goes into an evaluation and development phase. That work is often done by research organizations, nonprofits, academic institutions, the private sector, government. We then do initial increase of seed to get the G1 generation. And then that goes into the hands of private growers who turn it into the seed that we need for large-scale ecological restoration. And they produce, millions of pounds of native seed that can be temporarily stored in seed warehouses before it goes back out onto the landscape. We also focused on what we call genetically appropriate native seed. These are species that are native to a region that come from the same seed zone, however you define that. We did not define seed zones in this report, and that have not been significantly changed or selected during the cultivation process. And so here's the report in a nutshell. If you don't want to read, I think it's like 400 pages. If you don't want to read it, here it is. Too long, didn't read. If you don't ask for the seed you want, you're not going to get it. So I like to think about this, when you go to the farmer's market and you want that really fancy spring green mix, and they say, no, we don't have that, but here's some iceberg. And that's what's happening in the native seed industry, that the seed that people ask for isn't available, so they take something else. And until we stop accepting the iceberg lettuce, which doesn't make a good salad, we're not going to get the seed that we need. And so, again, in a nutshell, what we need is strong, consistent demand by the public sector. This is a big problem. The people who can solve it are the big buyers: BLM, Forest Service, DOD. So if you all sing the same song, if you all say, this is the seed we want, and we're not going to take something else, if you provide technical assistance, if you allow time for the industry to respond to these demands, we'll have a more robust seed industry that benefits everyone, including the small purchasers. So we talked to a lot of people in the almost 4 years we were working on this report, many of them here in this room. So here are folks that we interviewed or heard presentations from. Thank you. We also did surveys and semi-structured interviews with native seed producers, with state agencies, and with federal agencies. So thank you. And here are some of our findings. So let's start by asking what people are using native seed for. And the biggest uses were creation of habitat for wildlife or pollinators or both, restoring plant communities in natural areas, restoring ecosystem function, and several other uses. We asked people what was important in the seed that they wanted to purchase, and nearly everyone said it has to be a native species. Good, that's a start. Over 80% said it needs to be from the same seed zone that we're using it in. That's great. And about 70 to 75% need certified seed. We did learn that the certified seed issue seems to be a little more important in the West. It surprised me that it wasn't much more important, because coming from the East, or at least the Midwest, it's not a big deal in Illinois. We don't do seed certification, but it is important to a lot of people. And then we tackled the substitution issue, and we asked, why are you substituting? Why are you taking the iceberg lettuce? And the answer was, we thought it was going to be, well, we can't get the seed we want when we want it. It's too expensive. But really, the answer was, we just can't get it. It's not available. The seed we want is not available, regardless of time frame, regardless of price. When we talked to federal agencies, they acknowledged that they knew there was a benefit to having a planning horizon of 3 to 5 years. They also acknowledged that often the funding and the natural disasters that drive seed use didn't allow that planning horizon. So that's something we need to address. They recognized that there was a need for more botanists in federal agencies. Probably all the botanists in federal agencies are in this room right now, and there needs to be more of us, right? And they also acknowledge that they are not in agreement across all the districts and offices about what local means, and that's very confusing to the industry. We asked suppliers, what is your biggest challenge? And the number one challenge was unpredictable demand. And we know this, right? A lot of the demand for native seed is driven by wildfires that are unpredictable in time and space. And so in a bad wildfire year, we may need to purchase 5 or 7 million pounds of seed. And in a year without many fires, it goes way down. So how can we level that out? Other challenges they noted were some species are just really hard to grow and produce at scale, and the difficulty in getting the stock seed that they need to start the supply chain process. This is good news. We asked suppliers if they could grow more seed if the demand was there, and virtually all of them said yes. So we looked at it in all different ways, west versus east, size of the company, but the vast majority said they could produce more seed if they knew they could sell it. So here are our recommendations. We made 10 of them. The first 7 are general, the last 3 are specific for BLM. And the number 1 recommendation is we all need to get on the same page. We need an interagency structure, a coordinating body that helps us all be asking for the same things, sending that clear, consistent demand to the industry about what seeds we need, where, and when. This organizational structure, we looked at the National Interagency Fire Center as a model. We looked at some other models. We think the Fire Center is a good model. This center could do things like set priorities, set policies for seed use, initiate regional programs, and I'll get to that on the next slide, provide technical support, be a warehouse for information and data. Every time we put seed down on the land, we're doing a kind of experiment. And if we can learn from those, we will improve. And so we need a warehouse for data. We need to be collecting data in a similar way. So those of us who like to study those things will have access to it. And also communication is another role for the National Center. But we also recognize that native seed is, by its nature, a regional product. It should be collected and increased and used regionally. And we had a lot of hope when we heard about some very successful regional programs. Some of these were state-based, so some of them are here in this room, Texas, Nevada. Some of them were eco-regionally based, Great Basin, Mojave, Colorado Plateau. And these kind of regional coalitions or networks, which may comprise federal agencies, state agencies, seed growers, nonprofits, botanic gardens, seed banks, work together to address the needs for that particular region. How much public land do we have in our region? How frequently is it disturbed and needing restoration? What are the top workhorse species for our area? What do we want to be asking the industry to provide? And because the industry is part of these networks, they're there hearing these conversations and know what to grow and know that it will be purchased. These regional hubs, if you will, can look at scenario planning, what's going to be needed into the future. They can curate seed, both storing for long-term that G0 seed, as well as we think every region should have a warehouse, a climate-controlled warehouse that can hold larger quantities of seed, and they can share information. So we have great hope for regional programs. We also recognized that tribal lands have very analogous issues and desires for restoration. Many tribes have developed native plant programs, native plant nurseries to collect and grow the plant species that they need for their lands. But many of these are under-resourced, so we can help with capacity for tribal nurseries, and recognize that we have as much or more to learn from tribes and indigenous knowledge as we do to share. We heard of several inspiring programs. I know we've heard about the Fort Belknap program a couple of times here this week. So we need agencies to be better customers, and there's a lot that can go into this. One is leveling out that demand. It can't be driven solely by wildfire. And one of the ways you can level out demand, well, there are two main ways. You can have a program of proactive restoration. You can commit to restoring how many 100,000 acres in your region every year, regardless of fire or not. And you can purchase the seed to do that. And if you need it for a fire, fine. And if there isn't a fire, you can use it to restore all our degraded lands. And believe me, there's plenty of them out there. We can also increase the shelf life of this product. So seed is a living thing. And when you throw it in a shipping container, it doesn't live very long. If you wouldn't, I tell all of my seed collectors this, if you wouldn't leave your baby or your dog in those conditions, you shouldn't leave your seed in those conditions. And it pains me to think of all the times we're putting dead seed out on the landscape because we haven't taken care of it. And think about that cycle. That is, the effort of the collector and the researchers and the growers and the people who put the seed down and the people who went and monitored that failed restoration. That's a lot of time and effort, and we need to do better. The other thing the public sector can do is oversee and ensure responsible seed collection on their lands. So we have a lot of seed reservoirs in our natural areas. If those get over-collected, they won't be there for the future, but we do need to allow access to get the foundation material for this process to work. We also asked USDA Conservation Reserve Program and other programs to consider incentivizing the use of native plant materials. Next, outreach to suppliers. Suppliers can't supply what we want if they don't know what we want. And we also can do a lot in terms of technology transfer. And so there's a great system in this country supporting farmers through plant material centers, through extension, focused on crops, but that hasn't extended to native seed crops. And we think we need a system much like the plant material centers, maybe it is the plant material centers with additional budget and capacity to support native plant producers. Producers need to know what's working, what isn't, what seed is wanted for the future. There's a whole lot of research that we need to do. It's job security for people like me, so I like this. Basic research on ecological restoration as a process. How do we deal with climate change when we're sourcing our seeds? What ecosystem function is gained by our restoration? Incorporating indigenous knowledge into restoration. Economics of the seed industry. We had 2 ag economists on our panel, and there's not a lot of people studying the economics of native seed production. Technical knowledge on how you take that G0 seed, bulk it up without changing the genetics significantly, with maintaining genetic diversity during that process. How do we test seed, certify seed, store seed? How do we put it out? Adaptive management, using every seed treatment as an experiment. And better understanding seed zones and moving towards a national system that will provide clarity for the industry. Infrastructure. All right, we've been talking all week about the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act. There's money right now. There's money to invest in infrastructure for this, and we need it. We were pretty distressed by some of the things we heard about warehouse conditions. As I mentioned, seeds living. If we don't treat it right, it's nothing but a really expensive bag of mulch. And so we need to do better. We need humidity and temperature controlled seed storage in all regions of the US for bulk seed collections. Seed cleaning is another issue. Many of us rely on the Bend Seed Extractory to do cleaning, and they do a fabulous job, but they have an upper limit. They're at capacity. And so we need to build those kinds of facilities around the country to support a growing supply chain. And then these last 3 recommendations are specific to the BLM. Very similar issue here, the seed warehouse system in BLM we felt should be nationally managed. Seed is an important national natural resource, and the conditions need to be improved. Often seed is not in cool and dry conditions, and having them distributed cuts down on transportation costs as well. We recognize that perhaps the best seed bank is Mother Nature herself, and that our seed reservoirs are precious, and plants in natural areas continue to adapt and evolve to our changing climate. And even if we had all the seed that we would ever need in production, we're going to need to continue to add genetics from the wild to help those seed lines adapt and respond to climate change. And so natural plant communities are the ultimate source of seed for restoration and need to be protected. Judicious seed collection, wonderful. Overexploitation, not good. And lastly, we note that there is a program within the BLM that has been doing this work for a long time, and they need more capacity. They have the botanists, this Plant Conservation and Restoration Program. They have the botanists, they have the botanical knowledge. They need the budget and capacity to address all these issues. So there's the summary of the recommendations. Again, we think a big problem needs a big solution. BLM, Forest Service, you guys can do this, and you can help us create a better native seed system for everyone. Here's where you can find the report if you haven't seen it already. I know Robin Shane is in the audience. She has cards that have a QR code on them that you can go to for the report. Thank you for your attention this morning, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Or I'm happy to go back to drinking my coffee, but all right, I see Bethany.
How do we get to proactive restoration?
Yeah, you know, I heard yesterday Utah has a very impressive program of proactive restoration. And, you know, I think if we can work with appropriators to not appropriate budget for seed to post-wildfire times, if it could be a consistent budget, then agencies could plan and say, okay, I'm gonna do 100,000 acres every year, or 1 million acres every year, whatever it is. And, but the budget has to start the process. And so that's work some of us need to do on Capitol Hill. Francis? Yeah, that's a great question. And I will invite the members of the NAS group who are in the room. I see Beth, you're here now. And Ed and Nancy, if you have ideas, please pipe in. I think, again, that's you know, a conversation that we need to have with agency heads and appropriators, that this is an integral part of the process, that every restoration could be an experiment if we do a little pre-planning, if we collect data on it, and if we share that data. Any of my colleagues want to pipe in on that? Peggy.
I just wanted to ask if you're getting, like, I love all the recommendations, but I really feel as though every land managing agency should see themselves, and I hope they do see themselves in the recommendations in terms of protecting those native plant communities.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I would argue, when you're arguing for us to you know, build up the plant conservation program within BLM, every agency needs a plant conservation program, and we don't have them. And so it's all of us, one people at a time, working, you know, collaterally, or it's over and over and over on the same stuff. And we need to, the federal government needs to understand that they need to have plant conservation botanists in those agencies.
Yeah, we certainly made the point that botanical capacity was needed in all agencies. Just in my quick summary, it was just in BLM there, but yeah, everybody needs botanical capacity. Ed?
The promise of the study was the rollout of regionally based programs. And Francis said, there's no way the supply chain can succeed and thrive without both applied and other research. We need so much of that information. And without that information, we will not have a supply chain that moves along and gets the seed out. So research has to be integral on a regional basis, building those regional programs. And so funding should flow, I would hope, on the federal level to those regional programs. And part of it should be the research capacity in the region, because they're the ones that know the region best and know how to.
Right, and as you and I pointed out several times during the process, things are different in the East. The West, the scale is so much bigger than some of the issues we're dealing with in the East, and so we do have different research needs. Yes.
So you talked about a coordinating group, recognized this as a federally funded report. All of the agencies involved in that coordinating group were federal. Was there consideration of inclusion of state and other users into the coordinating group or agency like or?
Yeah, we certainly saw that in the regional programs, the kind of boots on the ground part. We did not prescribe whether or not they should be part of the overarching kind of governance structure of these regional systems. But yeah, there's certainly a role for input there. But I also recognize the bigger a group gets, the harder it is to move it in the same direction. Yeah.
You mentioned the importance of tribal-led programs, and I'd just like to put in a plug that the Intertribal Buffalo Council will be starting a seed program this summer.
Wonderful. That's wonderful news. Yes. Yeah, that's a subject near and dear to my heart. As we see loss of botanical training at universities in our country and other countries, that certainly is an issue. It is not one we tackled as part of this report, but it is an important issue. I'm sorry. That was really outside our scope, so we didn't tackle it as a group. It is something I've thought about. We do run a botany program at the Chicago Botanic Garden. There are other botanic gardens who do this as well. It is something that I lobby about a lot, the need for botanical training in this country. So yeah, it's something I care about, and Patricia's waving. Do you have something to add?
The botanical capacity assessment that you guys did, I mean, it doesn't matter that it's, 10 years old, it still is true today.
Yeah.
Does that often.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, years ago, it's longer than 10, Patricia. We worked with Botanic Garden Conservation International to do a report on botanical capacity in the US, and we looked at academia and government and nonprofit sectors, and it's limited in all of them.
Hey, Kaye,
Yes.
can I say something? I like all the young folks in this room to know that next I haven't even talked to Tom about this. Sorry. Next seed conference, we're going to have a job fair, okay? And the job fair is going to reach all of the federal agencies and all the state agencies if they want to join in with us so that we can get the folks that are getting out of these programs into our agencies. So I'm making a promise to you. It was just too much this year to do it, but we will do it the next one, okay?
All right. Time for one more question, I'm told. That always gets everyone to hunker down. I don't want to be the last. All right, if not, I will turn it back to Tom.
Thank you, Kaye. All right, our next speaker is Elizabeth Ledger, and Dr. Ledger is a professor in biology in the biology department at the University of Nevada, Reno, where she has been faculty since 2006. Her research focuses on plant ecology, evolution, and native plant restoration in invaded areas of the Great Basin, and she works closely with state and federal agencies and nonprofit partners to translate research findings into changes in management practices. She received her PhD in plant ecology from UC Davis and did postdoctoral research focused on invasive plants at SUNY Stony Brook. In addition to her work in plant ecology and restoration, Dr. Ledger is the co-creator and director of the University of Nevada, Reno Museum of Natural History, parenthesis, that's so cool, which supports organismal research, teaching, and outreach at UNR. Please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague, Beth Ledger.
Hey, Tom. Okay, how do you go back a little bit? Okay. Good morning, you all. Okay, funny story. At 8 o'clock when I was supposed to be speaking, I was in my bed asleep. So last week I had the first cold I've had since like 2019, and that whacked me for a loop. And so the good news is I'm 2 hours better rested right now than I would have been had I been here at 8. And yes, still at my age, you can still do the AM PM mistake on your alarm, which is what I did. Can you believe it? It's like unbelievable. So thank you, Kaye, for stepping in and doing such a great job. And thank you all for rolling with the schedule changes. I appreciate it. Okay, so I've been coming to these seed conferences since the very beginning, since Snowbird. And as I've been watching the talks the last few days, I started reflecting on what changes I've seen since we started this a long time ago. Some things are good. The focus on traditional ecological knowledge, that is totally new. That was, if I'm not mistaken, not mentioned at Snowbird, and it's just gradually increased over time. So hooray for that. I've also more and more building of small stories of success, of people just getting it done. My favorite stories are people who don't, necessarily deal with the whole challenge of the whole picture and just get projects on the ground and get started in a small way. And I feel like that has been increasing over time, people just getting it done. On the more depressing side, I've seen more and more talk about climate change and assisted migration than ever before. Back in the day, even 10 years ago, the idea of assisted migration was pretty fringe. Like it was sort of weird. It was like something we talked about, but nobody was doing. And more, we're just facing the fact that this is something that we're probably gonna have to do, and myself included. So that's definitely new and a little bit depressing. However, when I get depressed, I like to think about, honest to God, I have to back up to this scale to not be depressed about what's happening, and really think about the evolution of plants on Earth. They've done harder things. Plants have done harder things than deal with humanity, right? They literally had to crawl out of the ocean, green algae, and colonize land. They had to evolve stomata. They had to evolve roots. They had to figure out how to stand up. They had to evolve stems and leaves and seeds. And, over these millions and millions of years, plants have figured it out. And so we are this tiny little blip on the edge of this graph, right? Humanity. But plants have been here forever. And while we might be throwing up some challenges right now, I just know in my heart that whatever we do, they're going to be fine. I don't know that we're going to be fine, but the plants are going to be fine, right? So that is honestly the level at which I sometimes need to think. Where I live is the Great Basin. It's beautiful. These are the traditional homelands of the Washoe, Paiute, and Shoshone people. Again, who've been here for, in the thousands of years. But the plants that you're looking at, these have been here for potentially millions of years. So I take the long view, right? These plants on this landscape, their form and function has been shaped by natural selection over tens of thousands of millions of years. Sagebrush, Artemisia, is estimated to have been in North America somewhere between 13 and 23 million years. That's a long time, right? And so we walk out on the landscape and we see these plants and we're, we don't totally understand their entire history, but they have been moving, they have been evolving, they have been innovating, and if they haven't, we're not looking at them on the landscape. So these are really, truly, successful organisms. For us, though, we have this problem that we are not plants, and it's really hard for us to see the world from a plant perspective. And I am so guilty of this. I anthropomorphize like crazy. I will probably do it 15 more times in the next 30 minutes because it's just how we interact with the world. But that tendency of humans to be anthropomorphic is perhaps challenging when we try to understand what these plant communities are up to. I'm sure this group all understands the term plant blindness, also known as plant awareness disparity, or just like a massive vertebrate focus. I think, however, we should change this term to plant weirdness, because I think we do see plants, we just see them in such strange ways, given our vertebrate focus. So I'm going to show you some examples of this plant weirdness, a couple AI examples, a couple examples from art. Art and artificial intelligence, they just reflect ourselves back at us, right? Like, computers aren't making this up. They're just like literally telling us, it's a mirror. It's an embarrassing mirror, you guys. I don't know how many of you heard Tom Kaye's ChatGPT plant jokes yesterday. They were pretty great and weird, but that's us, right? It's not them, it's us. So I'm going to show you some examples. So the first one, you know how you can do a keyword search like in your photos for a particular noun? Okay, this is what happens on my laptop if I search for cat in my photos. It gives you like all your cat pictures, but it also gives you this like top 10. And so this is for my top 10. Cat. It does a super good job. It even finds this top left, that's like a cat picture in a painting. That's sort of weird. It gets a bobcat. These are some of my cats, honestly. And that one, it even sees my cat lying on the side. It knows that it's a cat. AI has got cats down. Okay, my next slide is what happens when I put in the word plant. Look at that. These are plants. This is my child in various stages of development, quite honestly. And yes, she is frequently standing by a plant, but AI is picking up on this weird sort of background situation. That is a pig, for God's sakes, and there is straw in the background. Like, yeah, that was a plant, but like this is in the top 10, you guys. And weirdly, it doesn't think that flowers are plants. Like, I have so many pictures of plants on my phone, and AI thinks that plants are leaves, right? And that flowers, if I do flowers, I get flowers, but like, these aren't plants, right? So it's super bizarre. We just have this massive vertebrate focus, and it's built into our systems. My daughter would kill me. She's 17 now. These are like not contemporary photos. Okay, so super weird. Next, an art example, which is pretty fun. Post-pandemic, I went with my daughter to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and saw this fantastic art show by Namjoon Paik, who is a wonderful avant-garde artist. He was born in South Korea in 1932. He's no longer with us. He lived in Japan and Germany and the US, and he was really interested in media and the natural world. He spent 5 decades making really fun art. This was a very popular display at the museum. This was full of tons of people. This is called TV Garden. This has 49 televisions stuck in the middle of plants. He made this the year I was born in 1974. And I hope this video plays. I'm not sure because I was sleeping, not testing. Yeah. These TVs are not silent. they're playing this hilarious montage of people dancing and like really vibrant music in the middle of all of these plants. Oops, there we go. And the people are standing around staring at it. And for me, I teach plant identification to a bunch of undergrads who are wildlife majors and do not want to be there. And for me, this totally resonates with what I feel like I have to do in class sometimes to like make people pay attention to me, you know, that I literally need to tap dance in the middle of the plants, just like these people, to make people see them. So when I saw this just totally resonated with me. I was like, yep, I get it, buddy. So I just love it. Another really crazy art example, this is my daughter, contemporary, she has grown up, and they were in New York and they came across this really funny exhibit where someone had taken plants and stuck them on, I'm not sure I like this one so much, stuck them on the wall as if they were trophy mounts and then animated them. So this is also a video. I don't know, yeah, look at that. Right? That's ridiculous. And again, this is us trying to relate to plants, right? Like we're just like, okay, one more AI example. Can you guys see this? Do you know how PowerPoint suggests alternative text for your photos? This is an AI hallucination of a vertebrate. This is not a giraffe walking across a dry field. This is a picture that a BLM collaborator sent me of a population of my favorite plant, squirrel tail, that he thought would be super great for restoration because this site is burned, it's invaded, it's grazed, and there's these tough little plants here. So I was putting this on a slide, and I swear to God, this is what AI said. It hallucinated a giraffe walking across this dry field. And I thought, okay, that's a one-off weirdness, but look what happened when I put his close-up. This is a close-up. What the heck, right? That is a cow pie, if anything. That is like not a zebra. But again, this just reflects us back at us. Like we are so vertebrate focused, we are seeing them even where they do not exist. This is a plant, right? But AI is telling us this is a zebra. Oh my God. So not every artist is like this, and not every AI is like this. ChatGPT can tell like a pretty good joke about plants. I mean, they understand. And so what we're trying to do as humans is just really be a little bit more sophisticated in our view of plants. There are some great examples of art where people do a super good job. Phyllis Schaefer is an incredible artist where I live. She does these amazing, compelling, artistic, and botanically like accurate landscapes of our area. And so, you know, I think we should all try to aspire to be like Phyllis and see plants the way that they are. Studio Ghibli, also, the Miyazaki films, does a great job incorporating plants in their animations. They're not the star of the show, but they're the background, but they're botanically accurate and beautiful and diverse. And so these are examples of people who are, you know, trying to actually view the plant world as it is. And that's how I feel as a scientist too. You know, again, I have my bias, but I am trying to figure out what these plants are up to. They've been doing it for millions of years, despite my bias, by asking them questions about what they're doing. So not assuming I know what makes this community function, but asking a series of questions about what they're up to. So I'm going to share 5 times when I asked questions and got totally surprising answers, things that I would not have expected. Thinking about how plants are sticking around in disturbed areas. Why are you here? What helps you establish after disturbance? How have you changed in response to the environment? What's your history? What's your distribution of genetic variation? And then community function. How well do you play with others? And every single one of these challenged my worldview on how the world worked and gave me something completely new to chew on. This last one, community function, is one of my favorite examples of being wrong in a long time, and I cannot wait to tell you about it. I love being wrong because it means that we're learning, right? So the second thing that makes me not depressed when I think about climate change and various things going on is this. the humans involved. So these are all my people who are all sitting at this table, many of them. These are all of the grad students, most of the postdocs, and some of the technicians I've had the privilege of working with over the last year. And the idea that all of these people care enough to try to figure out what plants are up to just really warms my heart. These are my people. You all have your people, and all of you people also warms my heart, right? We might not be able to fix it, but we can try to figure out what plants are doing, and we can try to give them little nudges. And I feel like this has been building this workforce, so yay, hooray for these people. Okay, so back out to plants. In our best case scenario, the Great Basin is a beautiful, diverse shrub, grass, and forb land. In the worst case scenario, we are a completely invaded annual grassland. This photo by Owen on the right, this is probably burned many, many, many times. This is like the absolute worst case scenario. We've lost our perennial plants and we're dealing with entirely annuals. That's worst case scenario. Much of the Great Basin does not look like that. Much of it has burned once or twice and still has some remnant plants. And those are the plants I started interviewing when I first moved to the Great Basin. And you find these places where they're pretty disturbed, like the background matrix and all of these things are invasive annual grasses, but there are still these little natives persisting in the background. I'm sorry, like sort of, little polka dots in the foreground, just like this. This is a spot by my house that has burned twice in the last 10 years, and it's pretty invaded. But there are all these little squirrel tails, Elemus elamoides, hanging around and not going extinct. And when I first showed up in 2006, I started asking these questions about what properties are making these plants stick around. Are these just the remnants that are just hanging on and they're about to die? Or are these plants still here because they have some amazing skills that are keeping them on the landscape? I came from California and I had this perspective that these must be the really competitive plants that are sticking around. They must be big, they must be super competitive, and the small wimpy plants all died. So we're looking at like the bruisers, right, who can take this. So that was my bias going in. This experiment is pretty funny because I showed up at my job in August 2006, and you cannot collect seeds in the Great Basin in August 2006, and I do not know how to do science without seeds. So I was like, oh my God, I need to get some experiments going. How am I gonna do this? I don't have any plants. It's August. And I literally had a dream that my lab was full of seeds. That I opened the door and it was full of seeds. And that is not what was happening. My lab was completely empty. Today, if you go in my lab, it is full of seeds, as my students know, and they're always trying to get me to throw things away. But I'm like, no, this is a deep-seated insecurity that I do not have any seeds, right? I need to have seeds. So at this point, I didn't have any seeds. So we went out in the field and we collected adult plants while they were dormant. We found these areas driving around that had places that were invaded in the foreground, really close to uninvaded sort of natural areas in the background. And I wanted to compare characteristics between the survivors who were, managing to live with cheatgrass and sort of the ancestral population. So we dug up all these grasses while they were sleeping. And we took them into the lab and separated them into little halves and stuck them in pots and added water. One of my colleagues walked into the greenhouse and he said, "Why is Dr. Ledger planting broomsticks?" or something like that. He didn't understand, and I didn't know that this was going to work. But amazingly, you can dig them up, you can separate grasses, stick them in a pot, and add water, and they grow. It's great. And so we took these plants, both naive plants and plants from invaded areas, and we tortured them with cheatgrass. So this is one plant that we split in half. The guy on the right has got cheatgrass growing. See, there I go. Guy, it's not a guy, it's a plant. Plant on the right has cheatgrass. The one on the left does not. So we let them grow for a season and then harvested out the biomass and looked how well they did. So this plant actually did pretty well. You can see how big it got on its own and then how big it got with cheatgrass. And we were really asking this question, are we seeing evolution of increased tolerance to cheatgrass when we collect plants from weedy areas? And I really wanted the answer to be yes. And the answer was, sometimes, yes, we did see this shift towards increased tolerance when we're collecting plants from the most invaded sites. Great. Some of the things that they do, when we planted those broomsticks and added water, they started growing leaves instantly. It was kind of amazing. If you give them a little bit of water, they go for it. And so what we observed very early on was that the plants from that cheatgrass invaded area started growing faster. So we didn't know this was going to happen. 10 days after sticking them in those pots, I just realized, oh my God, something's going on, and it looks like there's a pattern. And indeed, those plants from the invaded area, almost 80% of them started greening up like that, right? Which is telling me that a really good strategy for sticking around with annuals is like greening up really early, grabbing all the water, being fast. The uninvaded plants don't totally have that going on, and they're a little bit slower, which is interesting. We did this again, and this time we knew to count days to green up. So this is a little bit different. So now a lower number means you greened up faster. So we dug out a couple of rice grass and Elamis multicetus populations, stuck them in pots, and lo and behold, this pattern continued, right? That these invaded plants were greening up quite a bit earlier than their uninvaded neighbors. So this tells me that early green up is probably important in these systems. Another interesting thing, and this was really hard for me to wrap my head around, is that those plants from those uninvaded areas were actually smaller. Not the ones I dug up, those are obviously smaller, but we grew them, collected seeds, and planted those seeds. And this is one of my first master's students, Courtney Rowe. She planted them, and the plants from the cheatgrass invaded areas were smaller. They're the little triangles on the bottom. And I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why that was. We put it in this paper, and honest to God, we just did not talk about it. You should read this paper, because this was really like, I did not know it was happening. We just made this graph and we moved on, you know? Because in my world, being big is how you be competitive, not small. It was really strange. And something is going on with these plants. The small ones, they tolerate cheatgrass competition better, but they also suppress cheatgrass. Smaller plants are suppressing cheatgrass more than big plants, which is in this paper, you guys. And something below ground must be happening, some sort of weird suppressive thing. And I still, to this day, do not understand it, but I just was like, okay, weird. I had to learn this lesson several times. So the second question, interviewing these plants, okay, I know what makes you potentially stick around as an adult, but we need you to germinate and establish from seed as well. So what is going to help in that process? And this was my second master's student, decided to tackle this really large challenge. And just like Kaye was saying, we realized that every restoration can be used as an experiment. There's so much time, money, and effort that goes into this work. If scientists just like poke in there at the right time, we can grab information in this really efficient way. So what Sarah did was collect seeds that were going into the restoration. Nancy Shaw and company were doing some restorations at the time, and so we just asked them, can you please save some of your seed that's going in the ground for us? And she did, happily. And this is a picture of one of her restorations. This worked super well. This is Elko County, some fires that burned in 2006. And Sarah asked this question about the plants surviving in this site. We know that every seed does not turn into a plant, right? You put seeds in the ground, some of them come up, some of them don't. And the question is that process random? Are you getting, just like the right seed happens to fall in the right little spot and it survives? Or are they surviving because they have particular characteristics? They're surviving because they're big. They're surviving because they're competitive, something like that. And you can answer this question by comparing the characteristics of the plants that show up in the ground with the plants or with the seeds that can I go back? No. Won't go back. The seeds that were in that original hopper, right? So if all of us, and myself included, if you just save some of those seeds that are going in the ground, label them, stick them in the fridge, right? You can come back 5 years later and compare the plants that actually survived with the ones that you put in the ground, and you can see if the plants that survived had a particular characteristic, and that will tell you what sort of helps plants survive in your site. So Sarah did that. With a couple different plants. And of course, she had to work with my favorite squirrel tail, Elamis elamoides, because it grows. And she collected seeds from 100 different survivors, at 2 different fire sites, and she compared those characteristics to the original seeds going in the ground. She grew them in a common garden for 2 generations. And this was a cultivar, by the way. This was Toe Jam Creek cultivar. I always laugh that the stuff from Nevada has the worst names. We made some like very off-color jokes about what the next cultivars from Nevada would be called, which I'm not going to repeat here, but they're always like these horrible names. It's like completely embarrassing to tell people about this particular plant, but yep, there we go. So Sarah did these common gardens and compared their characteristics. And I'm not going to show you graphs, it's too early for that. But what she found was that survival was not random. There was this particular subset of characteristics that helped plants survive in these Great Basin sites. And again, it was smaller plants, smaller seeded plants, smaller plants, things that made flowers earlier, they emerged earlier, and they had greater root allocation. Again, telling me that being small, sometimes you have to hear it more than once, being small is perhaps really adaptive in these invaded sites. And there is evidence that being small can be beneficial, right? So in the wild, when there is a huge drought, people are doing demographic studies, have found that all the big plants die during drought and all the small plants persist. So there is evidence for that in other systems. We also know when we grow crops that we have dwarf varieties for water-limited situations. So we have dwarf wheat, we have dwarf sunflowers when you don't have tons of water. So in these limited resource conditions, small is potentially better than big, which is completely against 100 years of competition theory, by the way, right? But it's true. You can't argue with the plants. You have to ask them what helps them. Okay, third example of me being wrong is asking how plants have changed. I'm going to give you 2 examples. One is sort of short term. How do our native plants change when we grow them in ag fields? This is a question we all want to know, right? We do those wildland collections, we hand them to growers, they have to bulk them. We almost don't want to know the answer to this because we have no option, right? Like we have to do this. But I'm just going to show you something I totally love. They've changed in a way that I could never have imagined. So there's that. And then I'm also going to show the middle is an example of an herbarium sheet that we use to ask about change over the last 100 years. And both of it surprised me. I'm going to start with the ag field change. So this was work done by my master's student, Rosemary Frederick. She just finished. And she worked with, guess what plant? Elamis elamoides that had been wild collected, handed off for farm increase, and then we got those farmed seeds back. And Rosie then took them out to the back of UNR, and she grew them in these various different treatments where we sort of reimposed natural-ish stressful conditions on these plants. So we had the original farm seeds, and then Rosie did various levels of torture, and then we took seeds off of that. And then we grew them in the greenhouse, testing their emergence rate, their size, and their competitive ability. Not surprisingly, we found that Rosie's treatments had effects on seeds, so you don't need to worry about all of her little treatments. We did a bunch of them. They basically are stacked from the highest resources on the farm to the lowest resources in this desert condition. And I will tell you that we did kind of too good of a job torturing them, and a lot of them died and didn't make seeds. So there was a little bit, we were trying to do a maternal effects project, but there was a little bit of selection going on too, quite honestly, because they did not all survive. But I'm going to show you, we only got enough seeds from the farm, obviously, because we just got them in a bag. The high treatment, which we laugh, it's like high resource, but it's Great Basin high resource. It's like really crappy soil and a little bit of fertilizer and a little bit of water. So it's high in quotes. It's not really high. But you can see that, seed mass shifted. The farm seeds were the biggest. Rosie's high in quotes treatment was the next. And then no competition is actually the only other group that made seeds in any sort of quantity. So those moved forward into the experiment. She planted them all in these pots. We never do anything small. So each seed goes into a pot. We know exactly where it came from. And we wanted to monitor emergence timing, which is something we have seen to be important. Squirreltail is so good at growing that if you just monitor it every day, you kind of wash out differences between individuals. So we've started monitoring twice a day. We'll monitor in the morning, and then we'll monitor in the afternoon. Even that doesn't give us enough spread. So Rosie had the idea of monitoring every 4 hours for 24 hours, including at night. And she asked me, she was like, should I monitor at night? And I was like, I don't think plants come up at night, honestly. Like, if I had to think about, when do you think plants emerge from the soil? After their coffee? Yeah. That's what Kevin said. I think it would be like 1 or 2 in the afternoon, like you germinate and then it's warm and everything's nice and it's wet and then you show up at 2. So I told Rosie, I was like, yeah, why don't you monitor at night for a few days? But like, I don't think that's gonna happen. It's cold. We keep our greenhouse cold. It's like 35 at night in there. Why would they come up? They're gonna come up in the afternoon. So you probably don't have to do this very long. Just do it for a few days. Of course, guess what? I was wrong. Plants totally emerge from the soil at night. So this is Rosie's figure. The daytime emergers are in yellow. The nighttime emergers are in blue. She did this for like 2 weeks, like literally midnight, 4 a.m., 8 a.m., noon, you know, like continuous. And this, you have to like get up and work. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, anyways, crazy. So she was monitoring these things and lo and behold, they were popping up at night. It was totally unexpected. Not only that, look at this, you guys. So when we look at our treatments, the farmed seeds who had a pretty easy life, they are not coming up at night. They're coming up in the day. When we torture them, and this is either selection or maternal effects, we're not sure, those plants from our no competition treatment, which was really low resource, half of them are coming up at night. That's crazy, right? And you can wave your arms and think of all these adaptive reasons why it might be great to come up at night. These are seedlings, they're not photosynthesizing, they don't need the sun, they're using endosperm, right? There's less transpiration at night, that maybe there's fewer herbivores at night, I have no idea. But these plants, this is potentially the same genotypes, just shifting as we grow them on a field from being like pretty cool and relaxed and ready to come up in the day to like, oh my God, I have to come up at night. That's crazy. I've never heard of a maternal effect on emergence timing, and I've never heard anyone else looking at plants coming out of the ground at night. So this just blew my mind. So 100% we are going to redo the survey. Just nobody wants to do it because getting up in the middle of the night looking at plants is horrible. But I was just completely surprised. Again, don't make assumptions. So, you know, recap, why are you still here? Because I'm small and I'm fast, not because I'm a big bruiser, right? That's what we're finding. Second thing, what helps you establish? Same trend. Being small, being fast, making a lot of roots, which I didn't really talk about. And, you know, these are not the things that I would have expected. I will just say that. The second part of this question, how have you changed? We know the plants, you know, potentially changing in lots of ways in these ag fields, but we're gonna look at how plants change over time, this middle example, looking at herbarium records, which is a great window into the past 100 years. So other folks in museums have done some really fun work looking at body size changes in vertebrates. And you can look in these vertebrate collections and see that for a lot of, not every population, but many of populations of fish and herps and birds and mammals, that they are actually getting smaller over time. And you can see this in our natural history collections. Some of them are getting bigger. These tend to be high elevation or high latitude species, and some of them aren't changing. But what you can see is there's very few, until recently, there were very few studies of changes in plants. I don't know why. I think it's just because, you know, we see plants as so plastic and so changeable that I don't know why people didn't measure this change over time in plants. It's potentially the reason why all these other organisms are shrinking is because the plant resources are, you know, getting degrading, but no one has really looked at change in plant size. I, of course, with my new goggles of small is good, decided that I was gonna ask if I can see evidence of shrinking over time in plants, which is what I would expect now that I understand that small is good, right? And so I did this work with 7 different annuals. These are all things that grow within a mile of my house. I'm not the world's best botanist, so I always work on common species. Like if I work on it, it's out there, right? Like I'm not looking for the little rare things. So I went to the herbarium and pulled collections of all of these little annuals. And I picked annuals because the collectors, when they grab them, they grab multiple individuals and they put them on a sheet. And so I'm hoping that there isn't, or if there is bias in the individuals they're pulling, that doesn't change over time, right? Like, who knows why they're grabbing certain plants? Hopefully it's a sample of the population. And then I get multiple reps on a sheet when you're looking at these little tiny annuals. So we have a beautiful herbarium at UNR. It goes back to the pre-1900s. This was the sample distribution we use. It's pretty funny. Our current curator does not like common species. He only likes rare things. So he collects rare things, and I study common things, and he doesn't collect common things. The people in the 60s and 70s collected common things, so we have sort of a biased representation. Very few of my plants get in there, and I supervise Jerry, but I cannot make Jerry change his behavior. People who work in herbaria are really stubborn, right? So we also need common things, you guys, for this long-term record. So it's a little bit of a messy data set, but even so, if you ask this question, how have these plants changed over time in our collection, you get this really cool and messy response that of these 7 species, 5 of them are getting smaller, which is what I would predict. I was pretty proud of that because I feel like I'm understanding the world. But then look at this. Some of them are getting larger. This is Mentzelia albicollis, which is an annual that I love. It's really happy with whatever we're doing right now, right? It's having a completely opposite response. Blepharopappus doesn't really care. It's doing its thing. It's been doing its thing forever, and it's continuing on. And so, just when you think you start understanding the world, like, you get something like this. And I love these results because it makes me realize I don't know the full story. So that's my next sort of query, right? Is what is your history? Why are some of you shrinking and some of you potentially really happy or not caring? So here, enter in these wonderful species distribution models that my former student Sarah Barget made. Each of these dots is a known herbarium collection, and then she extended those environmental conditions across the West and sort of mapped out potential habitat for each of these species. Herbarium are cool, and they have tons of resources for us. So I'm sure you don't remember because it just went by, but here's the sort of how they were responding to climate change. So the one on the left, Blepharopappus, didn't care. The 2 in the middle were shrinking, getting smaller, and then Mentzelia albicollis is on the right. The arrows show that it also goes down into Baja and Mexico. We just truncated off the US. So do you guys see something here? There's like some sort of pattern with the Mentzelia who's getting bigger. I mean, I do, sort of. This makes me think about where these plants spent the last ice age and where their center of diversity might be. We know that there was a huge glacier on the top of this map, and it was really cool and wet in the middle of the country. And that the plants, many of them retreated south, potentially things that liked it warmer and drier. So I stare at this and I see in the middle, these plants have this distribution that sort of suggests to me that they maybe spent the ice age on the West Coast or up in the north in some refugia, and maybe this Mentzelia retreated. I know this is a hypothesis, right? I'm just sort of speculating on why it might have this distribution in response. Maybe it likes it warm and dry, it went down south, and then it came back up in the last 10,000 years. We have a wonderful botanist and biogeographer, Jim Reveal, who speculated on the biogeography and evolutionary history of our region. And when I saw this map of his, I was like, yes, I really think he also speculated that a bunch of the plants that are currently in the Great Basin spent those glacial periods down south and then recolonized up. And I started thinking, maybe this is a way that we can find plants that are either really good at moving north, they're going to be fine with climate change, they're going to keep marching up, the Mentzelias of the world, And maybe we can identify other species, like maybe this Blepharopappus or those other ones that had those refugia in the north, and we're now the southern distribution, and we might need to give up on those and not do assisted migration with those kinds of species. So I started thinking, and again, this is more of a stub of an idea. I don't have evidence for this. As my collaborator, Tom Parchman, always reminds me, you cannot look at this right-hand distribution and assume you know something about where they spent their last 10,000 years. But I can make a hypothesis, and as a plant geneticist, he can sequence these plants and tell me where the center of diversity is. If it is indeed in the south, that sort of corroborates, this idea that they did spend time down in the warm and dry. So we would like to start doing that. It might be an efficient way to really think about what plants we want to move up, which plants we might need to, let go of, and think about who might be able to persist over climate change, taking this really broad view. So Tom's not here to tell me this, but he's always telling me you cannot make assumptions about, genetic history without sequencing them. And my next example is completely corroborates his view. Another time I was wrong. Thinking about the genetic history of this plant. You guys know this plant? Rabbitbrush. Yes, Ericameria nauseosa. This is the weediest shrub we have in the Great Basin. It lines every road. It loves gravel. It loves disturbance. It has a pappus. It's Asteraceae. My assumption would be that this thing has spread its genes everywhere, that there's not population structure, that, rabbitbrush populations are really just connected, and there's tons of gene flow, and we don't totally need to worry about, the evolutionary history of each population because they're spreading along roads. Guess what? Wrong. So Trevor Fask is here, and he and a bunch of us at UNR did some of this collection and sequencing work in a little tiny area where we work. And the craziest thing happened, which is each of these little populations of rabbitbrush, even when they're really close to each other, are really genetically distinct. They are not spreading all over the roads. They are really concentrated in these little patches. There's a little bit down the sort of southeastern range. There's a little more mixing, but like up in the top areas, the green and red, those sites are super close together and they're super differentiated, which just tells me, again, you can have hypotheses, but we are not always right about what plants are doing. And this just continues to keep me humble. I thought rabbitbrush was weedy and spread everywhere. No, you guys. Populations are really differentiated. I have no idea why. It's nuts. Okay, very last example of being wrong in a fun way is this answer to this question. How well do you play with others? So I work on populations, I work on grass, but I understand that the world is not full of populations and it's not full of grass, right? So there are more things out there. There are forbs and there are shrubs. And when we're doing restoration, we're not just putting one species back out there. We're putting out this whole suite. So how do these species play together? This is an example of a restoration that was, to me, is beautiful because it's full of squirrel tail. And it worked really well, and there's not a lot of weeds here. It's keeping it out. But if you are a bee or a butterfly looking at this landscape, you might be a little more disappointed. And so, I realize that I like working on grass because it grows, it's really collaborative, but I am going to have to bust out of my comfort zone and start working with the community. So this is sort of the community that I felt like I could handle. This is work that was done by the fabulous Alison Onure, who is here as well. And she had just more bravery than me and set out to work with shrubs, rabbitbrush, sagebrush, a couple forbs, and more grasses. In our work, we have been working with squirreltail. My obsession with squirreltail kind of got us to a place where we can understand some of the characteristics that help it survive. So for example, we found that 10-day root length is a really good predictor of whether or not squirreltail is going to live or die in a field setting. So we kind of understand that for grass, but we have not tried this until Alison with shrubs or forbs. And so Alison bravely took on the whole community and did all of this incredible work. And the questions we were asking are, can we figure out what helps all these species survive from seed? Maybe there's different strategies for shrubs with taproots or forbs that have a slightly different rooting depth or something. The second question, are there places on Earth, like collection sites, where everybody is wonderful? Could it be that this sort of evolutionary history of like either gene flow or migration or fire and grazing, something about this spot on Earth means that everybody in that community is really good at establishing with cheatgrass, right? Like, wouldn't that be efficient if you knew as a seed collector, oh, I need to go to this place because these plants are all awesome? Is that possible? Or, do you find the best establishers just like sprinkled all over the place? And then finally, this really important question, what happens when we combine these species from different locations? When we do restoration, just out of necessity, we're always grabbing things from all over the place and putting them in a hopper. We do not have the luxury of pulling 7 species from one location. Like, has anyone, I guess, if you're doing these sort of planned restorations really close, you might be doing that, but most of us are not. We're just like grabbing what we can and mixing it together. And we started thinking, are we missing out on some amazing sort of evolutionary history that could be helping these plants along? Do we have spots on Earth where these plants have sort of co-evolved to, efficiently use the resource? They're like splitting up, you go early and I'll go late and I'll go, at this depth and you grow at that depth. And over evolutionary time, are these communities just like really finely dicing the resource and efficiently capturing every single, drop of water, every single drop of nitrogen, and being a really great community? And what happens when we mix that all up? Are we messing up some amazing magical thing that's going on in these communities? So Allison did a lot of driving for this. I just want to note that we collected from a particular region in the Western Great Basin that, it wouldn't hurt you to move plants around. These are all within like 1 or 2, maybe 3 seed zones. But we tried to hit places that were pretty similar. And so Allison did this drive a lot. She collected all of those species from the little red triangles. We added a couple other sites in blue where only some of them grew. And then she planted them all out into 3 different field gardens, which are, I think, in purple. And then we also grew them at the greenhouse. The hard thing about working with the community is like, she was collecting seeds for 9 months out of the year and just had to keep doing this drive to get the early ones and the mid ones and the late ones. It was a total nightmare. So it's a lot of work to get the community. And so she did these field gardens, asking who survives when we stick them out in these super weedy, disturbed places, and then why, doing a lot of root work and emergence work and seed weight work, trying to figure out the characteristics. Just a note, we planted everything out in the field, but guess who came up? Grasses. So the forbs and shrubs didn't cooperate, as they don't. And so Allison had to do that in the greenhouse, right? It's really hard to study plants that won't show up. Like, I don't know how to work with you if you just don't cooperate. So she had to do the forbs and shrubs in the greenhouse. So I'm not going to talk about the characteristics of why these different organisms survived. You'll have to read her paper to find that. But I am going to answer this question of, are there some spots on Earth where everyone is awesome, right? Just like the history of this place means that everyone is great. And the answer is kinda. So on the bottom, each of these is a population. And we have all the different species shown on here in different colors. That black line, that black horizontal line, is average survival. And anybody above that is doing better than average. Anybody below that is doing worse. And so you can kind of squint and see on the very far right, that population. This is Peavine, some place that I love that has worked well in the past. Everyone is kind of above average there. It's like the Lake Wobegon of populations. Everyone is like doing pretty well. And then on the far left, there's Austin Summit, which is a little bit of a higher elevation site. Everyone there is doing kind of bad. Not as great as everywhere else. But everyone else is kind of in the middle. So maybe there's some spots on Earth where everyone's pretty good, but there is a spread. Okay, maybe. So we took this information and we built a bunch of different kinds of communities. First, we made one where we took the absolute best performer, the plant that was able to establish the best in cheatgrass, of each species, and it didn't matter where they came from. So we're just plucking the top off, you know, the best squirrel tail, the best sagebrush, the best rabbit brush, putting them together into a top mix. Then we did this little experiment where we took the top ranked locations, so like pea vine, for example, all of the plants from there and planted them together in their little, like potentially co-evolved little unit. Then Allison picked some random things, just like whoever from wherever, which is quite honestly what we do in restoration, right? We don't know. We just like mix it up. And then she did a fourth treatment, just random locations, just everything from one place, but just picked at random off this graph. Okay, so I'm from Nevada, and I need to ask you to put your money on one of these strategies. Which one do you think is going to be the best? Do you like this top rank mix where everyone has sort of a proven record of like being able to grow with weeds? Do you like this top rank locations? Do you like the random mix, business as usual, or do you like random locations? What do you like? 3? I liked 2, personally. I don't know how you people knew that 3 was good. That's not what I thought. I thought there was like some magic going on and like everything was, you know, co-evolving and like, anyway, I was really all in on these single locations, right? That was gonna be amazing. So Allison tested this in these really glamorous field site. Welcome to Nevada, right? She grew these in these really large mesocosms for 2 years. So she planted these 4 different kinds of mixes. We pulled 2 of the top ranked mixes, 2 of the best locations, 4 randomly assembled communities, and 4 random spots. We grew them for 2 years and measured these sort of community level outcomes. How much biomass are you pulling out of this resource? So that's productivity. And she invaded them after 2 years, and we asked how well these different communities were able to keep out cheatgrass. Again, I really thought these potentially co-evolved sites would be the best at keeping out cheatgrass because potentially they have evolved to use the resource more completely. I'm going to show you size first. On this figure, you don't have to pay attention necessarily to the gradation of colors, but the mixes where every plant is from a different place are in the blues and the greens. So these are arranged by size. So the mixes are kind of on the top. The single locations are in the redder colors, and they're kind of on the bottom, but there isn't a huge difference. It is significant. Random mixes are slightly larger above ground, but it's not like, this is not gonna blow anybody out of the water. It's like, okay, whatever, that could be just noise. This next thing, how well they kept out cheatgrass, this is the thing that absolutely blew my mind. So on this graph, bigger is worse. That means you grew a lot of cheatgrass, which is not what we want. And the smaller values are the things that we want. And do you see, you people who are correct, these random mixtures, these blue lines, are the ones that are doing a really good job keeping out cheatgrass. And those single locations, it doesn't matter if it's top ranked or just whatever, randomly picked, those things are growing a lot of cheatgrass. There's one on the very top that's a single location that's doing really well. Allison, I think that's all tourists, do you think? I think it's one squirrel tail who's doing all the work right there. That's my theory. Because that place has this ridiculously great squirrel tail. But on average, if you want to keep cheatgrass out, you want one of these mixes of just like random shit that hasn't seen each other ever. And how is that happening, you guys? How is that happening? This is not how we understand the evolution of niches, and the understanding of niche partitioning should not be working like this. And when you look at pictures of this site, like this is not a subtle effect. So this is one of those communities that on the left that is like keeping out the cheatgrass. I actually called Allison. I was like, did you put cheatgrass in all of these barrels, right? And yes, she did. And this random mix of plants just kicked it out. And the one on the right is absolutely swallowed by cheatgrass, which is what happens in the wild all the time. So this just absolutely blew my mind. And I started thinking, oh my God, we have been thinking about communities in the wrong way. And the analogy that I think of is, when you're on an airplane and there's that armrest and you get on, and when you first get on the plane, there's this like, no, it's my armrest. No, it's yours. And there's like poking, right? And you're like trying to like grab the armrest. And then over time, you kind of like chill out and relax. And like, you just kind of like, okay, we're going to leave a little bit of space here, right? Like, I'm going to take my seat, and you're going to take your seat, and we're not going to spend the rest of the flight like poking elbows, right? And I, again, anthropomorphizing hugely, I think that that is happening in these plant communities. I think that over time, plants sort of evolve, yes, the niche, but I think that they're evolving to leave a little bit of space between them, because that is potentially increasing fitness more than just constant fighting in these communities. And I have to share a quote from Erin Esplund, who is a very dear friend and collaborator who is no longer with us. She was always at these conferences. She's an exceptional human being. And she wrote this paper in 2018. And I'm going to read you this quote from Erin. She would have loved this experiment and loved this result. And so Erin wrote, while competitive coexistence, jostling, implies that species directly compete for resources, niche differentiation means that, in general, species avoid interacting. Or, more precisely, individuals that do not interact have greater fitness than those who do. We should ask ourselves the value of studying competitive interactions experimentally when the species in question may have evolved to avoid interacting with each other in nature. To which I say, yes, Erin. It is really interesting to me that these random mixes are potentially having these really competitive interactions that are using all of the resource and are keeping out weeds, and that over evolutionary time, that barrel on the left might sort of start differentiating and not competing quite as much and turn into the barrel on the right. But right now, weirdly, our restoration strategy of just mixing things might be having some unintended, maybe positive consequences for our communities. So it's really, this just blew my mind. Again, I just can't, thank you, plants, for being interesting and weird and always telling me something new. So asking all of these questions, right? Like, what are you doing? Why are you here? What's your history? How do you play with others? We have to ask the plants because we are just hopelessly biased with our own view of the world. I think, however, the most important question, right, is this. We know that we cannot fix all of these places on Earth that have been destroyed. We know that we cannot completely change the trajectory of plants, but it is possible that with, plants tell us what they need, we can figure out how to help them. In my system, bigger is not better, smaller and earlier is good. Don't make assumptions about gene flow in species that you haven't studied. Okay, I've learned that. History might be key to how they're responding to the present. If we think about where they spent, the Ice Age, they might perform differently than we expect, and realize that really small things, like combining species from different locations, might have really powerful community effects. So I'm going to continue to ask how we can help, even though I know we can't fix all of it. I'm going to thank all of these people for continuing to go forward and asking how they can help, and thank all of you, right? We know that we're in a time of unprecedented change, and even if we can't fix it, I do believe it's worth trying to make it a little bit better, and I think it's worth witnessing the change and witnessing just sort of the progress of plant communities, even if we can't completely control it. And I will thank all of you for being here.
We don't really have time for questions, but I encourage you to ambush Beth during the break.
Yes, good.
Just a couple of small things. One is, thank you to everybody who's here from a partnership. And if you haven't checked in with our folks at registration,